Hebrew culture are found throughout the Old Testament. 6 years the land was to be worked, planted, harvested, but in the 7th year it was to be given rest, to lie fallow, untended. A field was not to be planted to the very edges, but it says open space was to be left for the wild animals. The people were not to consider themselves owners of the land, but tenants, stewards. Farmer and author Wendell Berry wrote, "There are no unsacred places. There are only sacred places and desecrated places. The care of the earth is our most ancient and most worthy, and after all, our most pleasing responsibility. To cherish what remains of it and to foster its renewal is our only hope." Sun Bear of the Chippewa tribe said, "I do not think the measure of a civilization is how tall its buildings are, but rather how well its people have learned to live with the earth and with their fellow man." Early 20th century landscape architect and city planner John Nolan offered his principles for urban development in 1907. He said, "Conform to topography. Use places for what they are naturally most fit. Conserve, develop, and utilize all natural resources, aesthetic as well as commercial. Aim to secure beauty by organic arrangements rather than by mere embellishments and adornments." In short, Nolan believed that a community should work to respect and maintain the natural integrity of the land. To those raised on free markets and rights of ownership, the words may sound a little un-American if they had not come from our own Theodore Roosevelt. He stated, "Every man holds his property subject to the general right of the community to regulate its use to whatever degree the public welfare may require it." You see, in every time and in every generation, there are those who see the common good as a higher calling than self-interest. Those who view the earth not merely as a commodity to be possessed, but as a trust that has a rightful and inherent claim which extends beyond ownership, beyond personal rights, beyond profit. I think
you'll hear more about that from the other speakers. I would like to talk to you, telling you about Paul Snyder, the lawyer and my partner, and the partner Edie, who's here with us today. Deborah, Wynn, and Linda were unable to join us. None of us wanted our partnership to end when Paul came to Westcliff. It wasn't that he didn't like Boulder anymore, but it was just that Paul was a small town lawyer and he just had to get out of Dodge. Boulder became a larger metropolis. When Paul told us he was leaving, we had extended discussions within the firm as to how the firm of Brauchley Snyder could continue as a firm with one of its partners in Westcliff. We explored a number of options and finally concluded that was simply not feasible. But the question you might ask is, why did we want to continue as partners with Paul when he was moving away? And the answer can be found in the kind of a lawyer Paul was and the kind of a relationship we enjoyed in our practice together. Truly great lawyers know that their role is not to play the role of the bulldog who will win at all costs. It is not to be the fierce fighter for the client irrespective of the merits of the client's cause. The truly great lawyer knows that his or her role is to solve the problems that clients bring to the lawyer in the fastest, least expensive, and least confrontational way. That lawyer knows that nothing is gained by assuming extreme positions when talking with other lawyers, but that all sides are best served when positions are set forth in a calm, well-reasoned, and thoughtful manner. The great lawyer does not hesitate to acknowledge that he or she was wrong when facts arise during the course of negotiating or litigating that prove positions he or she had initially taken to be wrong. And that was the Paul Snider I knew. During the course of our partnership, we worked together on some major pieces of litigation in large estates. One of them lasted a number of years and involved hostile family members who felt that they knew better than we how the disputes in the family might be resolved. It required great patience and even forbearance to deal with them during the litigation, while at the same time accurately evaluating the legal equities affecting both sides of the dispute. And those were qualities that Paul had in abundance. Sometimes clients would make unreasonable demands during or after matters were concluded, and Paul never permitted himself to become vindictive or hostile even when the clients were unreasonable. When it came time to bill a client, the first thought Paul had was not how much money he could make, but whether the fee was a reasonable one, taking into account all the circumstances. I can still see Paul shrugging his shoulders and laughing when he decided a fee based mostly on time was too high and would have to be reduced. The client's interests always came first. Paul was, in short, a lawyer's lawyer. And the qualities that made him a wonderful lawyer made him a wonderful partner. In Brauchley Snider, the name of our firm, we enjoyed a camaraderie that I doubt exists in many firms. So long as Paul and I were partners, money was never an issue. Each of us was confident that the other would be dealing fairly with his partners, and there were never arguments about income or expenses. Our bi-weekly meetings were always cordial, irrespective of the kinds of issues we confronted, and disputes, if any, were always fairly and quietly resolved. Paul was not only a terrific partner, he was a computer kind of guy. He had a computer on his desk long before anyone else. And indeed, he had a computer long before any other lawyers had discovered that a computer could be a substitute for a dictating machine and a legal assistant who benefited from the dictation. Paul began doing all his own work on the computer, including typing, research, and the myriad of tasks that we now all take for granted. That was not all. He kept track of his time for billing purposes, since, as most of you know, we lawyers bill by the hour, or as some of you probably think, by the minute. When a client called or came into the office, Paul immediately instructed the computer to keep track of how much time he had spent. This precision gave rise to one amusing episode in the office. For years, Paul and I were dealing with a lawyer down south who had represented a well-known established family from a southern state for many years. I was the conservator for one of those children, and I paid all the bills that were incurred by her in the course of the dispute we had with the family. And during the course of our representation, Paul and I were astonished that one of the family retainers who we were required to use charged approximately 1/2 of an hourly rate that Paul and I were charging. And we attributed that to the fact that down south things are less expensive than up north. We were disabused of that notion one day when Paul, I, and our southern colleague spoke on the phone for an extended period, and when I reviewed his bill and our bill, I discovered that on that particular day, he had done nothing for the client other than talk with us, and we had done nothing for the client other than talk with him. But when I looked at the bill and reviewed our bills, I saw that I, who had kept my time in my head, had billed 3/8 of an hour. Paul, who had a computer and used the computer, had found that he'd spent 1/2 an hour, and the southern lawyer who used his imagination found he billed 1 3/4 hours. It turned out that the rate in the south was low, but the clocks run fast. I paid his bill. He was a family retainer, and I was not about to get into an argument with the family down south as to whether he was a good lawyer or a reasonable lawyer. But it was an amusing incident and gave me some insight. Well, we were all sad when our attempts to keep the firm together failed and Paul pulled up stakes and moved to Westcliff. And we knew that we would thereafter see each other but rarely. That sadness cannot be matched by the sadness we now all feel, knowing we will never again be able to enjoy the friendship that bound us together for so many years. And on behalf of the entire firm, I extend my deepest sympathy to Marty and to the children. Your husband was a wonderful man, and you were privileged to live with his partner for many years.
Good afternoon. My name is Vic Barnes, and first I want to thank Marty for allowing me to speak about Paul. He was a good friend and trusted partner, and I'm truly honored to be here. So thank you very much, Marty. I can't remember the first time I met Paul, but I think it was probably sometime in the fall of 1998. That's the year that Marty and Paul moved from Boulder down to Westcliff, and it's also the year that my wife Jackie and I moved here. And but I do know, I'm getting ready for this meeting, I've gone through some files, and I do know that by early 1999, Paul was already very active. He was attending meetings of a group that eventually became called the Custer Heritage Committee. And you know, one of the things that I remember very early about asking Paul, and probably one of those meetings are, is why he moved to Westcliff. And what he said is that I've been all over Colorado, and this is the best place I've found. and then going through some of these papers, I came across a letter that Paul wrote, and I'd like to read you what it said. And this is a letter that Paul wrote on behalf of the Custer Heritage Committee, and it was sent to the Board of Directors of GOCO, and it was in support of a application by the Trust for Public Lands to get a conservation easement on the Rusk Ranch. And here's what Paul said. Having traveled extensively throughout Colorado for more than 50 years, I can attest that there is no other place in Colorado so stunningly beautiful, so relatively unscarred by development, and yet under such pressure to grow as in Custer County. And I think that says a lot about Paul and why, you know, his vision and so forth. I think one thing it tells you is that Paul and Marty coming here, this wasn't an accident. You know, it was a well thought out decision. And what makes that even more meaningful is I was talking with Marty here a while back, and she said they didn't know anybody when they moved here. All they really knew is that this is a community that they really knew enough about that they wanted to be here and be part of. I think it also gives us an idea of Paul came here with a vision. You know, he knew very well the characteristics of Custer County and the Mountain Valley, and he really wanted to work on maintaining those characteristics. And so he dove right into that. Now I mentioned that the Custer Heritage Committee. This was a group of people that started meeting right at the same time that Marty and Paul came down here in late 1998. And their goal was very simple and straightforward. They wanted, and most of them were ranchers, and what they wanted to do was look for ways to keep ranch lands from turning into subdivisions. And it was a remarkable group. They eventually named themselves the Custer Heritage Committee, and one of the first things they did was enlist the services of the Sonoran Institute, which comes in small communities like this and helps with wise growth. And this group, it was a really dynamic group. A lot of the people that are here now were part of those discussions. But they decided to put on a community forum, and they formed a steering committee. And some of the members are here. Bill Jack is here. He was one of the principals, and Sarah Shields, Jim Little, Pat Bailey, and there was 2 or 3 other ones. But they quickly got this forum going. And it happened in, I think it was late June of 1999. They produced this booklet here, and it's titled Keep a Custer County Special. And it was a really very successful meeting. It started out the evening before with a barbecue and live music, and I think there was something like 300 or 400 people together. Well, anyhow, they came up with two really high priorities out of that meeting. One of them was agriculture and open space. The other was schools. And there were some other ones like economic development and water, but those first two were considered the most important. And so then one of the things that they also decided to do was look for tools to achieve this goal of basically maintaining the quality of this environment. And one of them was a master plan, and Paul was put in charge of that master plan project. And they had meetings, there was meetings later on that year, and then there was a draft report that was put out in 2000. That particular report wasn't adopted as the master plan, but what it did was set the foundation for the next effort, which started in 2001 and resulted in the county's first master plan in 2002. So Paul was a leader in that group, but I think that probably the most important thing about that group, and again, Paul was very key there, was it led to the Ranch Land Preservation Project. And when we look out here now to the west and northwest, and we see all this land here, virtually all of that is in conservation easements, and that's a result of this committee. They went through well, it was a partnership. There was Cattlemen's Trust and Colorado Conservation Trust, the San Isabel Foundation, the Sonoran Institute. The Trust for Public Lands was a big player, and Woody was a lead guy on that, getting funds for this project. But it's just an amazing project. We have about 10,000 acres down here with several ranches that are going to be in agriculture for the foreseeable future. So that was really a great accomplishment. Now, at the same time that this was all happening, there was a group called the San Isabel Foundation, a trust that just started. It started in 1995. The first easement was in 1997. And one of the interesting things that I found out going through the files is that my wife Jackie and Paul and I were in the graduating class of 1999. That was when we were made members of the board. And just like he did on the Custer Heritage Committee, Paul took a lead role. In 2000, he became the chairman of the Land Preservation Committee. And this is a committee that handles all of the conservation easements that come through the foundation. And to give you and it really took off and started growing San Isabel. Now it's called the San Isabel Land Protection Trust. But to give you an idea of the growth that occurred at that time, and Paul was a very big part of this, in 1999 there were 5 conservation easements that was held by the San Isabel. In 2007 there was 84. That's a tremendous amount of growth and continued on. In 2007, Paul resigned from the board, and he didn't resign because he was disenchanted with the board, but during this time period, working with the Custer Heritage Committee and the San Isabel, he was gaining a well-deserved reputation as an expert in conservation easements. And people were coming to him wanting him to represent them. And he was concerned about a conflict of interest with San Isabel. And so I tried to talk him out of it, but it didn't work, obviously. But that didn't end his relationship with San Isabel. He kept working. We would, I don't know how many times, a number of us are here on the Land Preservation Committee. I can remember lots of meetings where we would stop and say, well, we need to see what Paul would think about this and seek his guidance. I can even remember a few meetings where we called him in the middle of the meeting. You know, he was that important. You know. And he started to spread out because of his reputation, and he was working with a number of different groups, the Cattlemen's Association, Colorado Open Lands, the Upper Arkansas Conservancy District, Rio Grande, and so he was really having a large impact on conservation. But Paul, knowing his vision, he knew that even though conservation easements were a big part of his life, that there was other things to do, and one of those areas was in county planning and zoning. And I've been on the planning commission for Custer County for a number of years, there's a couple other members here, and I can tell you firsthand how much work that Paul put into helping us do our job. I mentioned the master plan work that he did earlier on. He would, I don't know how many times I would call him and ask guidance on this, that, or the other. He would come to our meetings. Our most recent effort, and we're still involved in it, is a revision of the county resolution, which is a document that basically regulates what happens in land use here in the valley, or in Custer County. And we have a lot of workshops, a lot of meetings, and these aren't crowd-pleasing events, you know. Just grinding through, arguing about words like shall and may and those types of things. And so if we get 3 or 4 people in there, it's a big crowd. But there's one person that was there more consistently than anyone else. It was Paul Schneider. You know, he had that much love for this valley, and he knew that you had to mix in the conservation easements with all the other zoning regulations. So he made a tremendous contribution, and just like when I was working with Paul at San Isabel, I would call him all the time. And you know, Paul, and I think it relates to what Chris had to say, he wouldn't charge you for this. You know, I'd talk to him and say, well, you need to bill us. No, he'd say, nah, you don't need to do that. Now, some big projects we paid him, but he was very generous with his time, and so I really enjoyed working with Paul, and during this time period, he just made a lot of contributions towards maintaining this Western heritage that we're so proud of. But above and beyond that, what I really admired Paul, and I think it relates to what Chris said, is how he went about doing his work. And one of them was his composure, and again it relates to what Chris said. I never saw Paul lose his cool. You know, I was in a lot of meetings and heard him speak an awful lot, and some of these meetings were fairly contentious, and some of them disagreed with Paul, but he was always articulate, he was always respectful, and even, I know there's sometimes when people would come out and be outright untruthful, you know, and it would, I could tell, it was irritating, but he would still keep his composure and keep the high ground. I was also impressed with Paul's tolerance. You know, obviously he had to tolerate a lot from me because he'd have to explain to me things that for him were automatic. But I really appreciated how tolerant and patient he was. And you know, one of the things that's really interesting about Paul is I would complain to him about, well, I can't believe so-and-so is doing this or involved in something that was contrary to what we believed. And if I was wrong, he'd let me know. But if he agreed with me, he'd also say, well, this is a good person, and they've done a lot of good things, and we need to take a look at their position and why they're doing what they're doing. So I really appreciate that, and most of all, what I really appreciated was Paul's enthusiasm. He was just always an upbeat guy, and well, I can give you an example. I know it's kind of hot here, and I'll be done pretty soon. If you called up Paul and got his recording, you got a bland message. You know, it'd be, this is Paul Schneider, I'll leave a message, I'll get back to you as best I can. I think it's a word. I've never heard anybody else put that on a recording. But if you call him up and he was there, he was always enthusiastic. He made you feel like he was excited about hearing you. And on that theme there, I'll mention one other thing about enthusiasm is that after Paul died, and it was the last conservation easement that Paul worked on. It was on a big ranch down in the Rio Grande, or in the San Luis Valley on the Conejos River, and Marty was concerned that everything had been taken care of, and so she contacted me. I contacted the Rio Grande, and they put me in charge of the owner. His name is Reyes Garcia, and I think Reyes is here today. But I could tell talking with Paul, or talking with Reyes, that he had a high amount of respect for Paul. And then one thing he said to me really struck a chord. He said, you know, Paul and I were buddies. You know, and that really hit me. And I got to thinking that this is not unusual. He was friends with most of the people he worked with in the land trust as well as landowners. And that's what made him so effective, is because people recognize that he was on a calling, he was on a mission, and he just did a number of great things, and he was a special man, and so that's how I'm going to remember Paul, as a special man working in a special place. So thank you all for coming, and I think now Marty has some comments.
Yes. I have 6 minutes that I want to talk to you, but take a minute and breathe. So I'll do a commercial note just for a second. If you donate to Paul Snyder, you're donating to San Isabel. They have set up a new fund, good idea, Bill Donnelly, to help landowners who want to do a conservation easement, but who can't afford the upstart costs. So should you wish to know how to do that, talk to one of the San Isabel staff. It's something that would mean a lot to Paul. 72 of you already have, and I have not written you a thank you note. So, thank you. One of the things Paul never liked about me was how much I acted like I thought I knew what he was thinking. He's not here. So I'm going to tell you what he'd be thinking. I can't string words together as well as Paul could, but I think you'll hear his voice. The first thing he'd say to Dick and Vic and Chris is that you spoke with hyperbole. He would have said, really, he wasn't that great. He was a decent guy who tried to serve justice and preserve open space. And then, hyperbole or not, he'd get over his contrary response, which he so often had. I'm not looking at you, so I do. It's his sister. After he would get over his contrary first response, he would say, thank you very much for the kind words. He would love this. He would absolutely be blown away. The second thing he would want me to say on his behalf is that you gave him so much more than he gave back to this community. Paul did love his work in Boulder. I was stunned that he wanted to move here, and so did I. He said when he came here, he came home. He also said, and when I leave it, I'll leave it in a pine box. Okay, it's a little urn. What you offered him, just look around this room. All of you worked with Paul in one way or another, or played with him. What you offered him to do was his favorite thing, which was to deal with challenge. Complicated issues put such a grin on his face. He would talk about shall and may and will, but really he got very excited about perpetuity. He did love mediating disputes. Well, you define perpetuity. I mean, really, there's a bunch of lawyers here. Most of all, it pleased him when he could help disputing parties find common ground. Unlike a lot of lawyers, he didn't like to go to court. He thought he had failed if he went to court. He would absolutely want me to convey to the people in this room, and some who aren't, that it was a privilege and an honor to work for you and with you. Paul has a sister in Alaska who came to see him, actually to say goodbye at Thanksgiving. It's Krista. He had a sister here named Lenny who lives in Castle Rock, and she's here with us today, as are her husband and her kids, who have been a huge resource for me in the last few months. Lenny said to me when we were planning this event, so what kind of music are you going to have? Not looking at you. I think most of you know, maybe some of you don't, that Paul came from a Macedonian family. He came from a family that was very musical. And one of the things that Paul and I had in common was that we loved Broadway plays, and we had parents who loved Broadway plays. And our favorite play was Oklahoma. Some of you are from Oklahoma. And we loved very much to do, I just lost the name of it. Oh, What a Beautiful Morning. So I thought, well, maybe Lenny's right. Maybe we ought to have some music. So I want to end my talk and say thank you. It really takes a village. I cannot tell you how much you meant to Paul in his last months, to me in the last months and weeks. It's been incredible. Most immediately, Vicki Donnelly, Jackie Barnes, Cliff Lanes, Brittany. They've been wonderful. I wouldn't have done this event without those ladies. And Bill Jack telling me I had to. But now what I wish I could do for Lenny is if only there were somebody here who could do Oh What a Beautiful Morning. Paul and I sang it at our wedding, and we made the people join in for our wedding, which, by the way, was at 7 in the morning. That's cruel. So maybe there'll be somebody who will help us sing. And that'd be great, because I have been cooking all morning for y'all, and there's going to be some cookies. We will put the chairs away, and you all can talk to each other. But if only there was somebody who could play. Oh, yes.
I'm not a real lawyer, but you might want to move back. Here's where we find out if it's possible to play with trembling hands and a lump in your throat. And let me tell you that you can rest assured that this won't, let's try not to ruin your love of the song. I want to say this about Marty. She called about a month ago, and she asked if my partner Heidi Fair and I would come here and do this number. And you might notice that the actual musician in the group is not here. And we were so excited and so honored. And we were about 2,000 miles apart at the time, and we agreed to do it, and then we realized that we had committed to mentors and youngsters through South by Southwest. So in the end, Heidi said, you go, I'll go down and work for both of us, and since she's a lot stronger than I am, she's down there and hasn't even gotten run over yet. But she did make me promise one thing, and she said, the reason I'm sending you because she really wanted to be here. And she actually knows the tunes. She said, if it doesn't get done before you do it, please remind people about Paul's sense of humor. And I see everybody smiling right now, because if you worked with Paul, you knew he really could deliver a pitch. And I love that about Paul, but I came to love even more. In fact, I know I don't need to remind you of his sense of humor, but Robert Frost once said, this poem reminds you of something you already knew. And I'm going to say, what I came to love was not the pitch, but the wind-up. And maybe I could remind you of this, because before, Paul always had that twinkle in his eye. And just when that type of humor that was going to be satiristic and cynical, and yet positive and progressive all at the same time, and give you a laugh first and something to think about later with less than a sentence worth of words, which must be some kind of record for an attorney anyway. Those eyes would explode. They would twinkle. And I remember, and also just the slightest grin came. And so I liked that because it enabled me to get ready. You know, I know most of it goes over my head anyhow. And when that twinkle would happen and that little grin, I envisioned that Paul probably had a bag of pixie dust that he was carrying somewhere hidden from us. And that if he got bored or if the time got right, or if he just felt like leaving, he could probably put on like one of those woodsman's hats from Richard the First era and sprinkle some over it and lie away. And I'm pretty sure, in fact, that's the very thing I thought when I heard that he had passed away. It just got to be time. And there's nothing anybody can say changed my mind about that. Now, one hand's not trembling yet. This is not my first memorial service. And you people seem like a real civilized group. But this is your last chance. The first time I played a memorial service was for my grandfather at his church. And nobody had to listen to what I sang or played, because by the time I got up there, they were rolling in the aisles, they were clapping, they were frothing at the mouth, weeping, moaning, they were had deadly serpents strewn all over. Some of them were drinking poison. So if you brought any snakes, now's the time to get them out. Marty wanted me to tell you that this guitar used to belong to Tex Ritter. He ordered it new. I know it looks like it came out of a box, but he ordered it new in 1938. And when I was able to get it many years later, after it belonged to Tex and another singer named Tex Williams, who had a big hit on Smoke, Smoke, Smoke That Cigarette, Don Belleville came over and he said, "I've never seen you with a guitar strap that looked any better than an old worn out range." He gave me this nice custom one. There's a bright golden haze on the meadow. There's a bright golden haze on the meadow. The morn is time, and it looks like it's time to clear up to the sky. Oh, what a beautiful morning. Oh, what a beautiful day. I've got a beautiful feeling, everything's going my way. All the carols are standing like statues. All the carols are standing like statues. They don't turn their heads when they see me walk by. But a little brown maverick is winking her eye. Oh, what a beautiful morning. Oh, what a beautiful day. I've got a beautiful feeling, everything's going my way. All the sounds of the earth are like music. All the sounds of the earth are like music. The breeze is so busy, it don't miss a tree. And an old
Thank you.